So this video, people, I'm asking you for your participation, which by the way has made very little difference any other time I've asked for it. It's only the same old people that come forward. But the ones that do come forward are greatly appreciated, obviously, and the ones that have always got something insightful to say. But when I'm speaking about the complexities of what is to be a human being, I'm asking you, what do you think and feel about what is being said? Because I've said for many years now that life is a feeling, and the feeling comes first, and then the thoughts pertaining to the feeling are the manifestation of something which attempts to describe the feeling. And so I was just saying in my third reading of The Way to Mastery, The Way of Mastery, that when it speaks about judgment in the New Testament, which incidentally is very different, people, from the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, of course, it's an eye for an eye, and Yahweh is an exceedingly judgmental character, and not a very forgiving one when he's supposed to be a benevolent, loving God. But there's no evidence at all of that in the Old Testament. The New Testament, which is supposed to be the manifestation, the incarnation of God in human form. So therefore you would have thought that Jesus' policy would be identical to Yahweh's policy, because it is an incarnation of the same creature, but it evidently isn't. So therefore there's a lot of untruths going on. Jesus' policy in relation to forgiveness was acceptance, and live and let live, and turn the other cheek, whereas Yahweh's was an eye for an eye and smiting everybody under the sun. So I'm speaking about the complexities of forgiveness and love and God and a whole multitude, a whole myriad of other subjects. And I want to know what you think of my handle on these things. I want to know, do you think that I have a good grasp on these things? Do you think that it's an interesting train of thought? Have you heard other people saying similar things? And before you answer, I want to ensure that you really know what you're talking about, and you really know what I'm talking about. Because if you just very, very broadly go, oh, I've heard lots of people talking about Jesus, oh, I've heard, yeah, nothing under the sun, Aaron, what you're saying, oh yeah, I think about those things all the time. You know, which lots of you often do say that. And I will say to you, well, I really beg to differ whether you do. Because lots of people think they know something, and when people hear something coming from me, then because it's gone into their minds, instantly they think that they know it, and that, well, they've always known it, of course. Oh, I know that. When we hear things, it's like, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that. But if you ask yourself, well, okay, if you say you know it, then there must be a lineage of your knowledge. So if you can describe how you know it and from whence your knowledge came, then of course you would be believable. There isn't a single philosopher on the planet who couldn't describe where their thoughts came from and how they accumulated their perceptions on things. A mathematician couldn't ever say, oh, I know what E equals MC squared means. Well, let's have a look if you really know what it is. You may just think you do because you've read a few lines of what Einstein said it was, but do you really know what that means? if you really know what that means, then you have to understand that math at that very, very deep and profound level. And if you do, then you can show a lineage of how you know that math to be. Starting from when you was a kid at school, you showed a flair for math, and then you pursued math in university, and then you went on to be a scientist and this, that and the other, and then you've learned this and learned that, and now you know how to do all this squiggly shit, and then you go, that's my lineage, that's how I know really what E equals some MC squared means. On just one level of perception. And so, this is the thing with knowledge. Whether we think we know it, which is the deception of the human mind, it's the deception of the ego, people. We can all just think we know about the world and think we know what love is, but when I'm asking you what is love, there's not a single one of you that's ever come forward with your version of what love is. Why? Because you've never thought about it and you don't know what it is. You've just got this misconception of knowledge. So when I'm explaining things to you, I'm explaining from a vast lineage of where my information comes from and how it is that I came to know something, and I'm expressing in the finest of details, laboriously, very often. And whenever I'm doing an hour's video, I'm only ever just scratching, not even scratching the surface of where my knowledge stems from, because it's a vast amount of information with thousands of books and hundreds of thousands of videos and a whole life of experience. But I endeavour to delve into all these arenas of where my mind thinks that information comes from. So, the crux of this video is this. I seem to know that I am what one version of Jesus, Jeshua ben Joseph, was espousing. And that version is the version loosely premised on the New Testament, but mostly premised on Gnostic writings and religious philosophy, and let's say the Book of Thomas, where the Book of Thomas, Jesus is reputed to have said that he is a son of God, just like you are sons of God. There is no difference in that we are all sons of God and daughters of God, for all you feminists out there. But it's the knowledge that most people don't possess. If you possess the knowledge, which is the Christos, people, if you have had the experience, which is the real knowledge, then that's when you know. And so, for those of you who have had very mystical or religious or paranormal experiences, whatever portal, whether it's near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, entheogenic, psychedelic, spiritual, whatever you've had, if you then have a deep intuitive knowing that you are more than the body, and in actual fact the body is Maya, the whole world is Maya, because when you delve into it with the deepest realms of mind, then you can clearly see that it is all Maya. It's very, very self-evident. If you don't know about it being self-evident, then you don't know it, do you? If you don't feel it intuitively, consciously, on a very deep and profound level, you don't know it. So you can't speak to that with any level of believability, can you? And that's why I think that the vast majority of you don't come forward, because you can never ever do that, because you don't really know anything. You just think you do. And that's the conism of the ego. That's what the ego's all about. The ego is a fiction creator. And the ego has created the fiction of everybody's life. It's created the fiction of the world. That's the job of the ego. That's the program of the ego. And it's very, very good at doing that. But when you have insight and knowledge and experience over and above that of the mundane, then that's when you start to have a perception of other worlds. And if you travel into other worlds, then you can go, wow, I've been to other worlds, other states of consciousness, many mansions in the kingdom of God, people. Many mansions. There are many mansions in the kingdom of God. And so if you start to really grasp these metaphors through experience, then you'll know what an enormous amount of this stuff in the Bible states. Now, whenever people speak about God in the Bible, invariably Yahweh is speaking from a cloud. He's following the Israelites in a cloud. He speaks from a cloud. He commands from a cloud. And Jesus, when he comes back again, he's coming in a cloud or riding on a cloud and all this sort of stuff. Why is it always clouds? What's the significance of clouds? Do any of you know that? No, you don't. I will very, very assuredly state that not a single one of you actually know why that is. But I'm going to tell you that I know why it is. Because I've experienced on several occasions, let's say a handful of occasions, whereby I have seen a togered, bearded, a humanoid made out of cloud reclining on the cloud, or lurching across the sky looking like a Greek god, with cherubs and angels and bat-winged and fucking teeth-fanged fucking creatures, all that sort of stuff. I've seen those absolutely as clear as day. And it's not just been like for half a second, it's literally been for 5 fucking minutes. I've looked at these things. Not only that, but I have induced through just breathing exercises a vision of something which looked identical to how I do, with my hair down, with this beard and everything, that face in the clouds. And so when I looked at that, oh holy smoke, what is that? It is an exact portrait of a bearded fucking bloke, and I wasn't bearded at the time. I was clean shaven with short hair, but now I'm looking exactly like what I saw. And so after about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it started to slip away. And then I thought, well, can I bring that back again? So I did the breathing exercise again. It was 10, 12 deep breaths. And then on the last breath, you really breathe in absolutely everything and you hold it. And you hold it for as much as you can, and then you let it all out. And then you induce DMT. I'm pretty sure you induced DMT. Then the face came back in the clouds. And it stayed there exactly in the same place, exactly the same face. And I'm like, okay. So with these experiences that I've had, some naturally induced, some with entheogens, I can see why biblical writers wrote about God speaking in the clouds, coming in the clouds, Jesus riding on the cloud, and all this sort of stuff. Because under certain influences of entheogens or supernatural, paranormal happenings which don't happen every day, we can see these things with our own eyes. And when that happens, it is exceedingly moving, and it's completely and utterly bewildering, because as I'm standing here now, every single bit as conscious as I am now, and I'm looking at some bearded yogurt bloke in the clouds, I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it stays there. The first time I saw this, it stayed there for about 10 minutes, and I would look away at other things, and then I would look back and it was still there. And these entities, they are social. They are living, You know, when we say somebody is asocial, it's not antisocial. If you're social, then you're social. If you're antisocial, you're antisocial. But if you're asocial, you're neither. And so what I'm saying is that they were expressionless. Not even expressionless. The way they look is just like this. You couldn't say it's not like that. It's not like it's none of that. None of those human features. It's just like they're not even focusing on anything. And so, from that feeling, you get that there's no malevolence. There's nothing at all which is trying to persuade you into thinking anything about this entity. There is absolutely no intention behind it at all. And I can't think for the life of me, if my mind was going to be creating that, why it wouldn't have an expression. If it was God, why wouldn't it be? Oh, like these pictures you see of Jesus. Oh, Lord. And all that sort of stuff. Because we've been told that that's how God is. Well, we've been told that God's wrathful. Why wasn't he wrathful? Why wasn't he looking down with a face of thunder? Why wasn't he looking like joyous? No, this is my creation. No, none of that. Just an empty expression. Just like a marble statue. Like anything you'd see from these marble statues around the world. They've got no emotional expression on their faces. So, I found that immensely curious. But what I'm saying is, people, is that this is where I'm convinced the biblical writers have got this notion of God from. And it's a very feasible one, particularly going back 2,000 years, when we were much less sophisticated. If anybody saw that in the clouds, then it's kind of like, well, fuck me. It was absolutely real, just as real as anything else is. And so, well, maybe that's God then. Maybe that's God. You know, the man up in the clouds that sometimes we can have a quick vision of. And then you project all your humanisms onto God. And that's what we've done in the Bible. We say in the Bible, or they've said in the Bible, that God made man in his own image. Well, of course, that's the projection, isn't it? Because if we are seeing what we consider could be God in our image, then we would assume that, well, if he's up in the sky, how are you doing?
All right.
If he's up in the sky and he's almighty and capable of this and the other, then, well, it seems a no-brainer that, well, he would just replicate himself in us. So I'm saying, people, I've seen these things. And I'm saying that I've had Yahweh speak to me. I've had Jesus speak to me. I've had very, very compromising times from the devil. And I suppose you could say that I've had the devil speak to me, telling me very, very evil, nefarious things. I've had angels communicate with me. And I'm asking myself why. Why have I had all of these supernatural experiences? Why is my consciousness to the level and degree of perception that I can put these pieces together? I've got no idea why this is, and I'm just pursuing it and seeing where it goes. But I know that I've been guided all my life. I know that I've been protected all my life. I know that for as long as the universe wants me to continue, then nothing could ever even come close to harming me. And even when I was shot in Africa, it was nothing. It's just water off a duck's back. 24 lead shots in my hand. I got a fucking bandage from the hospital, and then, you know, I bought a pump action shotgun, and I couldn't even fucking pull the trigger on it. So I was trying to learn how to do it with my left hand and all this sort of stuff. You know, but that episode of the shooting sent me on my spiritual awakening. And so nothing bad. There's been nothing bad about anything that's ever happened to me in my life. And I'm just asking why. So when we look at what Jesus is said to have said, then it's kind of like we all have the Christ within us. We all are cosmic God consciousness. And when Jesus is speaking about the Father, I and the Father are one, it's like my realized consciousness, my raised consciousness, my Christos, and that of the Father for the want of another semantic. What do we use? What do we say? I mean, was there such a word as the consciousness at that time? Was there such a word as the cosmos? Did they just call it the heavens? Could he have said, I and the heavens are one? I and whatever it is that enables us to think are one. It gets a bit convoluted and cloudy, doesn't it? So just to say I and the Father, then that simplifies things. And the whole Father figure, people can get a grasp of that. And then, when you see, of course, Jesus was very, very familiar with all of the Old Testament. And he evidently didn't have an affinity with much of the Old Testament, because his policy on forgiveness and judgment and many things was very different. And he always used to say, apparently, it is written that this, that and the other, but I say this. Now, what he was referring to, that it is said in the Old Testament. Of course, it wasn't called the Old Testament then. It was just a pile of fucking biblical scriptures, a mishmash, and they're all over the place. They hadn't been compiled into anything. So therefore, this scripture there, that scripture there, he was privy to these scriptures, and he would say that this and that is written, but I think otherwise. And so therefore, you can see that he isn't in line with the so-called Father, Yahweh, in any shape or form. Very, very different. And when you look into what the Gnostics or what other people have said about Jesus, this Greek scriptures and all different sorts of things, many people supposedly writing about Jesus, they say very, very, very different things to what's in the New Testament, people. And what they are saying, the books that never made it into the New Testament, are much more believable, because they are exhibiting humanisms, and they're not professing that Jesus was the born of a virgin and ridiculous nonsensical things like that, which has been so prolific in mythology forever, people. And if you looked into it, then you could see that there's apparently about 30 occasions when some god was born of a virgin, and the three kings went to visit, and this, that and the other. And it's no different to stories of Krishna and many others of the so-called gods that have been created. So what I'm saying here is that I'm a self-realized shard of God consciousness. I know that I am pure awareness at my root. I've experienced that. I've been there on myriad occasions. Every time I go into a meditation, I am in the pure, unadulterated isness, where there's no Aaron Berry, there's no world, there's fucking nothing. And so I know that exists fundamentally. And I know that there's many other worlds, many other mansions in God's kingdom. God's kingdom is consciousness, people. There are many mansions in God's kingdom. You can meet many entities, many varieties of beings and different things like that. And so having had these characters, these biblical characters speak to me, I'm at a loss as to why they would speak to me. Why didn't I have Hindu gods or Middle Eastern gods, or why didn't Muhammad come and speak with me, and why didn't Allah chastise me, and all these sorts of things. So logically thinking, well, it's because I was born in the Western world, and I was born under the auspices of these religious books, and this is deeply ingrained in my psyche. And so if I'm going to be encountering some sort of spiritual entity, then the spiritual entity is going to be manifesting what I have a familiarity with. If I have Ganesh appear to me, or one of the Egyptian gods, then what is that going to mean to me? I've got no cultural I'm bereft of any cultural meaning to those entities, but I'm not bereft of what the meaning of the Western world, God and Jesus is, and the devil and angels. Of course, my psyche is very, very familiar with those things. And so that's why those things were presented to me. But believing that they were actually God, Jesus, and angels, and this, that, and the other, well, we can do that or not. But if you are a thinking person, then you look for other explanations. And so it's kind of like, well, is our higher psyche inventing this stuff, or is there a higher being in another dimension feeding us this stuff? And if they are feeding us this stuff, then they want to give us a message. Well, why? Why do we have that? Why do some of us have this stuff? What's the meaning of that? What are we expected to do with that? Is this what I'm expected to do, just to keep speaking about it, to bring awareness about these things? Maybe that's what it's all about, people. Maybe I was given those experiences because just like Moses was supposed to be, I'm an articulator. But the point is, when Yahweh commissioned Moses to be Yahweh's mouthpiece, Moses said unto the Lord, Lord, I do not have the tongue for what you are requesting me to do. And he says, don't worry about that, you'll work it out. How he worked it out, that Moses' older brother Aaron, he had the tongue. So between them they got the job done. So the Lord works in mysterious ways. Go figure. And you wonder why the Bible would write something like that into these scriptures. Why wouldn't he just choose someone which was articulate and say that the Lord chose Moses because he was a very articulate and learned gentleman? No, they never said that. They said, well, Moses couldn't express himself. And so what fucking use was he? And even I'm not up for the job. I could never do that. I'm not the man to be the voice of God. Are you crazy? What are you trying to do to me? All these sort of things. So what I'm saying is that when we are self-realized, God consciousness, when we know that the Christ, Jesus Christ, is a metaphor for the Christos, and potentially we all have the Christos, and when we are in realization of our own Christos, then we know that we are all God, and then we know that this is a manifestation of mind via consciousness, and this, that, and the other. When we know all these things, people, then the world is very, very different, and this is what I'm expressing in my therapy sessions, and how I cannot just get involved in it. I don't see it like I used to see it. I see it very, very different. It's all purposeless. It just ghosts walking by with all this nonsense of offices and factories and all the things that the human being wastes their lives engaging in. It's preposterous beyond any meaning. I can't even grasp the meaning to it. Other than the fact that all those people, they have to be here for people like me, philosophers and kings and queens, to live how we do, to think how we do, and then to change the world in a certain way via our thoughts and our perceptions and things like that. So this gets then to some sort of a messiah complex, doesn't it? Because people will be saying, oh, you think you're Jesus, or you think what you're saying is so great. What I'm saying is very, very, very profound, and it's equally as profound as anything that you would ever hear anybody else speak about. And so there's something to be said for that when we enter into this realm of a high state of consciousness, of God consciousness, of having the Christos realized within ourselves. Then we are all tapping into the same thing. And so when Nietzsche said this and Nietzsche said that, good God, people hold Nietzsche in such high regard because he said something about the last man and the Superman. when he observed the human being as being absolutely pathetic. He called the minions the last man, the bottom rung of the ladder, the bottom of the barrel, vermin. The last man is vermin, and he was seriously disappointed why people couldn't be higher than that. And so he fantasized about a Superman. Could the human being ever be a Superman? Could they ever aspire to being, what Plato was speaking about in his Republic? When he was speaking about leaders, kings, they have to be philosophers at the same time, because if they're not philosophers, then they don't have the capacity to freely think, because they'll be full of biases and fears and all the rest of it. So philosophy is the finest attribute of a human being, and to have religious philosophy, of course, is the pinnacle, because it encompasses all things, not just the so-called physical. It encompasses the mental and the spiritual. So to be a religious philosopher, which I am, then I don't know whether it gets any better. And all the people I listen to who are very, very learned about lots of things, they can't tell me anything more than I've already experienced, because most of these people, they haven't experienced these things. They've learnt about them. And I was listening to Jason Jajani, Jason Reza Jajani, last night, exceedingly knowledgeable with all of the folklore and the mythology and the religions, you name it, he knew about it. But I wonder how much he actually physically or mentally experienced in these realms. How many of these gods did he actually meet in other mansions within God's kingdom? He's wrote a lot of very, very powerful, profound books, and one of the books he wrote was about synchronicity, because he's had an enormous amount of synchronicity. When we get into this realm, people, that's when all this stuff, all this magic presents itself to us, and we ask why. Well, it's because we need to pass the information on. So what I'm saying is, any of you people out there who think you know as much as I do, and blah blah blah, well, it's evident that you don't, because otherwise the cosmos would be using you to impart it to other people. Because what's the fucking point in one man knowing anything if he doesn't impart it to the others? There's no point to it all. It's like Jesus, just being a carpenter for the rest of his fucking life. No, it doesn't work like that, people. So any of you that think you know what I know, or even some of what I know, you're misguided if you're not writing about it or speaking about it. Because you're just thinking that you do. And I think that it's kind of like when you write a book, people. When you write a book, then that's when you have to bring yourself to task, because you have to be absolutely categorically explicit about what you think you know, and you have to write a lineage of what you think you know, unless of course you're writing fiction. If you're writing fiction, you don't need to put any of the answers in. So when Jordan Peterson states that he rewrote every single line in his maps of meaning 50 times or more, because he's a fanatical sort of person, to ensure that complex information was absolutely as easy as it possibly could be written to be understood. And it's a very complex book, even with his endeavours. And so when you've wrote a book, then that's when you know something. If you haven't wrote a book, then you don't know anything, to be fair, because you haven't worked all these things out in your mind. You haven't come upon the obstacles. You haven't come upon the flaws in your philosophy or this sort of thing. And so therefore, when you write it down, you get everything as clear as you possibly could at that moment in time. And then you can make amendments. That's why we always have new additions, because people learn more and then they make amendments. And so what I'm saying to you people, if you are of this perception, consideration, that you know a great deal, then you got to ask yourself, do you really know that? And if you really do know that, then why aren't you writing about it or speaking about it? Because it doesn't make sense, does it?